Father Michael, old and wizened, was a legend. His presence commanded respect, and his wisdom was sought by many. He had spent decades serving the church, guiding the faithful, and confronting the darkness that threatened to encroach upon their lives. His eyes, though tired, held a spark of knowledge and experience that few could fathom. He had seen more, done more, than any other priest. The stories of his encounters with the supernatural were whispered among the clergy, tales of exorcisms and battles with malevolent spirits. Each wrinkle on his face told a story, each scar a testament to his bravery and dedication. At least that's what Father John, fresh from seminary, believed. John idolized Michael. To him, Father Michael was not just a mentor but a beacon of hope and strength. John had heard the stories, the legends, and he yearned to be a part of them, to learn from the best. Every word he spoke was gospel, every gesture, a lesson. John hung on to every syllable, every piece of advice, hoping to absorb even a fraction of the wisdom that Father Michael possessed. The old priest's teachings were not just about faith, but about life, about facing one's fears and standing firm in the face of adversity. John longed to prove himself, to earn a sliver of the old priest's respect. He wanted to show that he was worthy of the trust and knowledge that Father Michael bestowed upon him. Every day he pushed himself harder, prayed longer, and studied more diligently, hoping to catch the approving glance of his mentor. He shadowed Father Michael relentlessly. Wherever the old priest went, John was sure to follow. He observed how Michael interacted with the parishioners, how he comforted the grieving, and how he stood tall against the unseen forces that threatened their peace. John was determined to learn everything he could. He absorbed every lesson, every prayer, every whispered word of warning about the darkness that lurked at the edges of faith. John was young. His faith, while strong, was untested. He had yet to face the true trials that would forge him into a warrior of the light. But he was eager, and his heart burned with a desire to serve. His faith, while strong, was untested. He had read about the trials and tribulations of saints and martyrs, but he had never experienced such challenges himself. He often wondered if he would have the strength to stand firm when the time came, if he would be able to uphold the teachings of Father Michael in the face of true evil. He yearned for the day he could stand beside Father Michael, a true soldier in God's army. He dreamed of the moment when he would be tested, when he could prove his worth and show that he was ready to take on the mantle of protector. He wanted to be more than just a student. He wanted to be a warrior. One chilly evening, a summons arrived. The air was thick with anticipation as Father Michael opened the letter. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, adding to the sense of foreboding. John watched intently, his heart pounding in his chest, a frantic plea from a nearby village. The letter spoke of strange occurrences, of a darkness that had taken hold. The villagers were desperate, their faith shaken by the events that had unfolded. They needed help, and they had turned to Father Michael, the one man they believed could save them. A young boy, barely 10 years old, was afflicted, possessed. The word itself sent chills down John's spine. He had read about possessions, heard stories from other priests, but he had never encountered one himself. The thought of facing such a malevolent force both terrified and excited him. The word sent shivers down John's spine, a thrill of fear mixed with morbid fascination. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to confront the darkness he had only heard whispered about. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and determination. Finally, a chance to confront the darkness he had only heard whispered about. He knew it would be dangerous, that the path ahead was fraught with peril, but he was ready. He had trained for this, prepared himself for this very moment. He would not falter. Father Michael studied the message, his face etched with a familiar grimness. He had seen this before, faced it many times, but each time was different, each battle unique. He knew the risks, the dangers that lay ahead, but he also knew that this was a test for John, a chance for the young priest to prove himself. He turned to John, his eyes holding a deep, knowing look. There was a mixture of pride and concern in his gaze. He saw the determination in John's eyes, the readiness to face whatever lay ahead. But he also saw the inexperience, the naivety of youth. He knew that this would be a defining moment for his young apprentice. This, he said, his voice low and grave, is your burden to bear. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. John felt the gravity of the situation, the responsibility that had been placed upon his shoulders. He nodded, steeling himself for the task ahead. This was his moment, his chance to prove that he was ready to stand beside Father Michael as a true soldier in God's army. John's breath caught in his throat. The room was cloaked in shadows, the only light coming from the flickering candles that lined the ancient stone walls. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, a suffocating blanket of expectation and fear. "My burden?" he echoed, his voice a mere whisper. The words felt foreign on his tongue, as if they belonged to someone else, someone braver, someone more prepared. He had expected to accompany Father Michael to learn from the Master himself. The thought of being alone, of facing the unknown without the guiding hand of his mentor, was almost too much to bear. To be given such a responsibility so soon felt impossible. The weight of it threatened to crush him, to bury him under a mountain of doubt and insecurity. "But Father," John stammered, "I'm not ready. I've never—" His voice faltered, the words dying in his throat. He had never felt so small, so inadequate. His voice trailed off, shame heating his cheeks. He could feel the eyes of the other priests on him, their silent judgment a heavy burden on his shoulders. He was supposed to be a warrior of God, yet here he was, trembling at the first sign of battle. The fear was a living thing, a beast that clawed at his insides and threatened to consume him. Father Michael placed a heavy hand on John's shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. The touch was both comforting and grounding, a reminder that he was not alone in this. "Every soldier must face his first battle, John," he said, his voice firm yet kind. The words were a balm to John's frayed nerves, a lifeline in the storm of his emotions. "This is your test. Trust in your faith. Trust in the Lord." The words echoed in John's mind, a mantra that he clung to with all his might. Doubt gnawed at John's resolve. It was a persistent whisper in the back of his mind, a shadow that refused to be banished. He wanted to believe. He needed to believe. The desire to prove himself to be worthy of the trust placed in him burned within him like a fire, but the fear was a cold fist squeezing his heart. It was a relentless pressure, a reminder of his own mortality and the stakes of the battle ahead. The image of the possessed boy, twisted and tormented, filled his mind, fueling his apprehension. The boy's eyes, dark and empty, seemed to bore into his soul, a harbinger of the darkness he was about to face. He was being thrown into the abyss, and he wasn't sure he could swim. The darkness was vast and unending, a void that threatened to swallow him whole. But somewhere, deep within, a spark of determination flickered. He would face this challenge, not just for himself, but for the boy, for Father Michael, and for his faith. The journey to the village was a blur. The countryside, usually a source of solace and peace, seemed to rush past in a haze of green and brown. The rhythmic clatter of the carriage wheels on the uneven path did little to calm John's nerves. He could feel the tension in his muscles, a tightness that refused to ease no matter how many deep breaths he took. Each jolting step of the carriage seemed to mirror the frantic beating of John's heart. His hands, white-knuckled, gripped the edge of the seat as if holding on for dear life. The rough ride was a stark contrast to the smooth, predictable life he had known in the seminary. Every bump and jolt seemed to shake loose another piece of his confidence. The weight of Father Michael's expectations pressed down upon him, suffocating. John had always looked up to Father Michael, seeing him as a pillar of strength and wisdom. But now, with the old priest's words echoing in his mind, he felt the crushing burden of responsibility. "You are our only hope," Father Michael had said, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. He prayed for guidance, for strength, for a miracle. The rosary beads slipped through his fingers, each one a silent plea to the heavens. He had never felt so small, so insignificant. The enormity of the task ahead loomed over him like a dark cloud, threatening to engulf him. He whispered prayers, hoping for a sign, a flicker of divine intervention. They arrived at a small, humble chapel on the outskirts of the village. The building, weathered by time and the elements, stood as a testament to the faith of the villagers. Its simple structure, devoid of any grandiose decorations, seemed to radiate a quiet strength. John felt a momentary sense of calm as he stepped out of the carriage, but it was quickly replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The air hung heavy with the scent of incense and fear. The dimly lit interior, filled with swirling smoke, created an atmosphere of unease. Shadows danced on the walls, flickering in the candlelight, adding to the sense of foreboding. John could feel the weight of the villagers' expectations pressing down on him, their silent prayers mingling with his own. Inside, the villagers huddled together, their faces pale and drawn. They looked to John with a mixture of hope and desperation, their eyes pleading for salvation. The fear in the room was palpable, a living, breathing entity that seemed to feed off their collective anxiety. John could feel it wrapping around him, tightening its grip with every passing second. Their eyes, filled with a mixture of hope and despair, followed John's every move. He could see the unspoken questions in their gazes, the silent pleas for help. Each pair of eyes seemed to bore into him, searching for a sign that he could deliver them from the nightmare that had befallen their village. The weight of their expectations was almost too much to bear. In the center of the room, bound to a makeshift altar, lay the boy. His small, frail body looked out of place against the rough wooden structure. The sight was both heartbreaking and terrifying. John felt a surge of anger and sorrow mingling with the fear that had taken root in his heart. This was the reason he was here, the reason he had been called upon. His eyes, wild and unseeing, darted back and forth. The boy's frantic movement spoke of a torment that John could barely comprehend. It was as if he was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. The sight of those wild eyes sent a shiver down John's spine, a cold reminder of the darkness that had taken hold of the child. His breath came in ragged gasps, punctuated by guttural sounds that sent chills down John's spine. The boy's distress was evident in every labored breath, every desperate sound that escaped his lips. It was a haunting symphony of pain and fear, a stark contrast to the serene prayers that John had whispered earlier. He could feel the boy's suffering as if it were his own. This was no mere child, this was something other. The presence that loomed over the boy was dark and malevolent, a shadow that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. John could feel its eyes on him, watching, waiting. It was a presence that defied explanation, a force that seemed to exist beyond the realm of the natural world. The air around it seemed to crackle with a sinister energy. The sight sent a jolt of pure terror through John's veins. He had faced many challenges in his life, but nothing had prepared him for this. The reality of the situation was far more horrifying than he had imagined. The fear that gripped him was primal, a deep-seated instinct that screamed at him to run, to flee from the darkness that threatened to consume him. He had never witnessed anything like this. The stories he had heard, the warnings he had received, all seemed like distant echoes compared to the reality before him. This was a battle between light and darkness, a struggle for the soul of an innocent child. John felt a surge of determination, a flicker of the courage that had brought him here. He could not, would not, fail. The reality of the situation crashed down upon him, drowning out the last vestiges of his bravado. He was not just a young priest, fresh out of the seminary. He was a warrior, standing on the front lines of a battle that had raged for centuries. The weight of that realization was almost too much to bear, but he knew he had to stand firm. For the boy, for the villagers, for himself. The time for doubt was over. The time for action had begun. As John prepared for the ritual, doubt gnawed at him. He tried to recall his training, the scriptures, the prayers, but all he could hear was the blood pounding in his ears, the frantic whispers of the villagers, the tormented cries of the possessed boy. He glanced at Father Michael, seeking reassurance, but the old priest stood apart, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on John. Was this a test? Was he being judged? The weight of expectation, the fear of failure threatened to crush him. The room seemed to close in, the air thick and suffocating. The scent of incense, usually comforting, now felt cloying, oppressive. John's hand trembled as he reached for the silver crucifix, his fingers cold and clammy against the cool metal. Doubt swirled within him. What if he wasn't strong enough? What if he couldn't help the boy? What if he made things worse? The fear was a living thing now, slithering up his throat, choking him with its icy grip.